Hi, everybody. This is SAAD for the SAAD Truth. Those of you who follow my work and have read some of my books and or scientific papers know that I have, on endless occasions, explained the types of accusations that are levied against evolutionary psychology as a theoretical framework. For example, I recently published a paper in 2017 wherein I explained the epistemology of EP short for evolutionary psychology, in a top academic journal. But let me here take this opportunity to yet again address one of the most galling of all accusations against EP, because this is the one that is regrettably oftentimes levied by supposedly sophisticated and educated fellow academics. Many of the detractors of EP are threatened by EP on ideological reasons, and those, of course, are quote understandable, in that if your ideological edifice is threatened, then you will huff and puff. So if you are a religious person and you think that evolutionary psychology is an attack on the sanctity of God, then you're going to be angry at evolution as a theory and evolutionary psychology as a theory to explain the evolution of the human mind. That's understandable. What annoys me is when people who should know better offer, quote, scientific accusations that only demonstrate how breathtakingly ignorant they are about the epistemology of evolution, how the epistemology of evolutionary thinking is structured. And today what I'd like to do is, yet again, I've already mentioned this on a million different occasions. One of the ones that annoys me the most is this idea that, well, EP doesn't offer any falsifiable hypotheses. Now, the short answer is, it is the exact opposite to that statement that EP offers. By the very nature of the grandness of the hypotheses that evolutionary theory posits, the opportunities to falsify evolutionary predictions are much, much greater than in pretty much any other discipline, precisely because many evolutionary mechanisms are thought to be universal across human societies, are cross-temporally universal. In many cases, they are cross-species invariant. So in other words, the amount of data that you could find to falsify an evolutionary prediction, an evolutionary hypothesis, is endless. The fact that in many cases you're unable to falsify an evolutionary hypothesis does not speak to the fact that epistemologically evolutionary hypotheses cannot be falsified. It simply says that that prediction has proven to be veridical, right? The theories espoused in Origin of Species stand tall today, not because we don't have the capacity to falsify whatever Darwin said in 1859. Believe me, very motivated people have tried to falsify his theories and failed precisely because they are veridical. So let me now take a specific example of how you falsify an evolutionary prediction. One of the sort of sexy findings from evolutionary psychology is the idea that women's preferences for facial types in men varies across the menstrual cycle. This is the CAD versus DAD effect. When the argument goes that when women are at the maximally ovulatory, fertile phase of their menstrual cycles, this is when they would prefer CADs, guys with high testosterone facial features. And then at other points, non-fertile phases of their menstrual cycles, they might prefer more feminized features, features that, if you like, exude the possibility of nurturance and so on. And this has been found in many several evolutionary studies, and so this had become sort of the accepted wisdom. But of course, as we know, evolutionary science in general has epistemic humility. That's why when we refer to scientific findings, we always refer to provisional knowledge, because if tomorrow something comes along that falsifies your current theory, well, then you're back to the drawing board. And again, there is nothing different about evolutionary psychology. It's the exact opposite. Evolutionary predictions, by the very nature of what we study, are unbelievably more falsifiable than other sciences. And I'll say more about this in a second. Well, a paper just came out in one of the most prestigious journal in psychology, Psychological Sciences. This came out, this is volume 29, issue 6, 2018. The title of the paper, No Compelling Evidence That Preferences for Facial Masculinity Track Changes in Women's Hormonal Status. There are too many authors. I'll just mention the first one, Ben Jones et al. And they did a study where they tried to control for some of what they considered to be the methodological flaws in some of the earlier studies that had found the effect. And in this case, they did not find the effect. So now this doesn't mean that the effect has been permanently falsified, but it certainly means that you can falsify evolutionary predictions. The prediction is very clear. The hypothesis is very clear. Women, if this effect holds true, women should exhibit greater preference for testosterone-laden markers on men's faces when they are in the maximally fertile phase of their menstrual cycle. And there are very clear theoretical reasons why you would expect that. So the hypothesis is very clear. The hypothesis is very falsifiable. In this case, it was falsified. So again, let me repeat. Those who claim that evolutionary predictions are unfalsifiable, let me translate what they're saying. I'm a moron who doesn't understand evolutionary psychology. I took a women's studies course at Wellesley, and now I simply ape that stupidity. Let me give you examples from my own work. I had a prediction. This is a paper published in 2008 where I said, well, let me see if the hourglass figure of 0.68 to 0.72, which is the range that men have a sort of near universal preference for the hourglass figure, let me see if I can demonstrate that it is a ubiquitous preference across many societies. So there's a very clear hypothesis that's very easily falsifiable. If the preference comes in at 0.68 to 0.72, this is evidence for the hypothesis. If it comes out outside those ranges, it falsifies the hypothesis. There's nothing unfalsifiable about that hypothesis. So I had a research assistant code female escorts advertising their sexual services across, if I remember correctly, 48 very, very different countries. And across all countries, the waist-to-hip ratio that these female escorts advertised online was 0.72. Therefore, there was evidence for the posited hypothesis. Had the data come back and it was 0.78, had the data come back and it was 0.63, then that hypothesis would have been, drumroll, falsified. Every single study that I've done in 25 years of work has involved hypotheses that are perfectly falsifiable. Every single study that endless, unbelievably sophisticated scientists who call themselves evolutionary psychologists, they could be neurobiologists, they could be cultural or evolutionary anthropologists, they could be physicians, Darwinian psychiatrists, consumer psychologists, behavioral decision theorists, behavioral geneticists, endless, profoundly sophisticated scientists, all of whom call themselves evolutionary behavioral scientists, they would be very surprised to know that they've spent their whole careers conducting research, but they were conducting research that is unfalsifiable. So the level of stupidity, the level of ignorance that is being exhibited by people who repeatedly ape the idea that evolutionary hypotheses are unfalsifiable is just baffling. And this is why you see me frustrated, because I've literally spent well over 2 decades, and I'm hardly the only one to do so, repeatedly trying to explain to people that the epistemological evidentiary threshold of evolutionary predictions is set much higher than the rest of the sciences. The reason why people think it's unfalsifiable, so now let me give you the cognitive explanation. It's because you're trying to use distal, historical phenomena, right? Evolution has happened in the past. And therefore, people think, well, if you use some theoretical explanation to generate a hypothesis, but that theoretical explanation occurred in a distal past, well, then you're engaging in post hoc theorizing. It is astonishing how dumb that is. Right? When you study the origin of the universe, as do astrophysicists, what do you think you're doing? You conduct an observational study. If the data comes out as A, it supports your prediction that the universe is expanding. If the data comes out as not A, it supports the alternative prediction that the universe is contracting. Nobody would say that this is a post hoc, speculative, unfalsifiable hypothesis. What do geologists do? They study rocks that are 400 million years old. Are they engaging in post hoc, unfalsifiable BS? What do paleontologists do? So any field that involves a generation of hypotheses using a theoretical lens that is anchored in a distal past, things like astrophysics, geology, paleontology, evolutionary theory, and many other fields, then they're all BS disciplines because they all use the past to generate theoretical, to use theoretical arguments to generate very falsifiable hypotheses. Let me give you another example from a paper that I published that has received quite a bit of attention, both scientifically and in the media. This is a paper that I published in 2009 with one of my former graduate students, wherein we looked at the effects of what happens to men's testosterone levels when either they engage in a conspicuous consumption act or they watch another male engaging in a conspicuous consumption act. And the idea is that our endocrinological system, in this case testosterone, will rise or drop depending on whether you engage in a conspicuous act or you see a intrasexual rival engaging in one. One of the hypotheses that we had posited is that when you put men in a car, for example, a Porsche, and you have them drive the Porsche in downtown Montreal where everybody can see you driving the Porsche, your testosterone level will go up, but it will go up more when there's an audience watching in downtown Montreal than, say, on a semi-deserted highway. So that was a very specific hypothesis. It turns out, to our surprise, that the endocrinological response of having higher testosterone occurred irrespective of the setting of where the drive took place. Therefore, that prediction was, drumroll, falsified. I have another paper that I published with another doctoral student. He started with me as a master's student and then continued in his PhD, where we looked at women's beautification practices, women's food-related behaviors as a function of where they are in their menstrual cycle. So one of the things that we looked at is, let's talk about sexual signaling, that they would beautify themselves more so when they are in the maximally fertile phase of their menstrual cycles. That's a very specific hypothesis. It's very easy to falsify. If you find that women beautify themselves more so in the luteal phase than in the ovulatory phase, the hypothesis would be falsified. So again, the reason why enemies of reason, the reason why intellectual terrorists repeatedly ape, and believe me, as someone with a large social media following, I get this incessant tsunami of stupidity thrown at me. The reason why people think that it's unfalsifiable is because they think that if the mechanism, the theoretical mechanism that explains the generation of the hypothesis is rooted in a distal past, that means, but bruh, it's not science. So you better rush and tell all the astrophysicists, all the paleontologists, all the people who study, the origins of the universe, that they are engaging also in fake science because, they're positing, quote, unfalsifiable hypotheses. Have a good day, everybody.